Living between Wednesdays, just trying to get by to the next fix. Living between Wednesdays, prefer the comics over the Netflix. Living between.
One thing I did want to ask then, because we've sort of touched on them all. So you're a high school arts teacher. Obviously, you're a comics creator. You're a bit of a historian now. When it comes to sort of art at large and teaching, how has this impacted the way that you teach?
I would definitely say that I stray away from what's in textbooks. I mean, we stick with theory, but when it comes to art history, I like to take more, I guess, a more modern take on what art history should look like. Not just in the sense of diversity, but also being open to contemporary artists. I mean, one of the things I've stuck with the Gathering Place is, and even the stories I'm planning for future issues, they're all artists who have passed away. They've all been artists who have passed away. And so I sort of taken on that role of, I need to, bring them to life and bring them to the forefront. But I look at contemporary artists as, you're part of what you're doing is also, tooting your own horn, but I help along as well. I mean, I talk about contemporary artists. I have my students come in, and especially my senior students, where we look more at contemporary works and modern art. I ask them to research artists who are working today, because they, in a sense, are your contemporaries, are your seniors. When you get out there, they'll probably still be around, and you'll be learning from them. And who knows, you'll probably have a gallery show with them. So these are your contemporaries. These are who you'll be working with. I don't like to use the word competing, right? That's especially when it comes to the arts. I hate the sense of this idea of competing artists.
Yeah.
We work together. We all work together for the same commonality, which is, storytelling and sharing beauty and, expressing emotions and communicating what it is that we love.
Okay.
So I definitely have strayed away from, looking at particular time periods as, a chronological order. I sort of look back at history as to when we need to know this for a particular type of assignment or art challenge that, we're looking at. So if we're doing something on social commentary, obviously we'll take a look at much of 20th century art, which was a big focus on, looking at society and the community around them. But we'll also take a look at a little bit deeper, further back in history, at artists who were able to say something about what was going on at the time, even though, artists, 500 years ago were a little bit restricted by what they could and couldn't say.
Yeah.
Because back then, artists were commissioned. They were commissioned. They were paid to, paint a portrait in a certain way, in a certain light. And you couldn't really stray away from it. But if an artist could sneak in a little something in there, they did. They did. And in a way, it was a commentary on the aristocrat or the politician or the nobleman that they were painting. And they would find a way to critique that individual within their painting that, art historians wouldn't find out until, 200, 300, 400 years later. So it's, yeah.
I mean, that has got to be the most, the absolute top tier, not passive aggressive, but sly way to just give someone a jive, right? Like, let someone 200 years down the road figure this one out and finally put all the pieces together once they've had a chance to look at everything.
Yeah.
So one of the...
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes history gives us oftentimes our history just gives us the facts and not those little side stories, the little tidbits of information that really make us go, I respect that individual much more now that they did that.
Absolutely. So one of the stories, because the people that you chose to write about are quite varied from when they are from, whether it's a couple hundred years ago or 200 years ago or so, right up to modern day. One that I found personally interesting was the story you did on Darwyn Cooke, which was quite personal, actually, as it turns out for you. Can you tell us about that?
It That story was actually rather difficult in that I needed to include myself. And as an artist, at least I know for myself, I'm very much like to be on one side of the camera than on the other. I'm more of a behind the scenes. I like to create the work and then sort of walk away. And so to include myself made it much more personal and challenging in that respect. But I really wanted to share a story on an artist who inspired me to not just return back to reading comics, but also back to illustrating comics. I used to illustrate comics back in the mid 90s, independent local work. And I sort of, fell away from that. And at around the same time that I stopped illustrating comics, I stopped reading comics. Not that my passion wasn't there. It was just, I found the market a little stale, for lack of a better word. And it was just, and I won't say stale in a negative way. It was just more stale in that a lot of the stories were becoming really repetitive, and I wanted something new. And I think I knew I would come back, but it would take something original or different than what was on the stands at the time to bring me back. And I happened to pop into a comic book store one day, and a copy of New Frontier was just sort of standing there very brightly in the midst of a lot of darkness that was on the stands. And it really caught my eye. The style had a very retro feel to the illustration, color. I grew up, my first introduction to superheroes were DC heroes. Yeah. So to see, Flash and Green Lantern and Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman all in the same book, all at one time was incredible again. And then that chance meeting, I couldn't have planned it any better. It was just in the stars to just happen to bump into someone. I'll bump into people and talk to people in the comic book store, and we'll start up a conversation about whatever we have in our hands. And that's what happened. And again, being away from comics, not knowing or not being familiar with Darwyn's work. I mean, he's had an incredible career from animation and then coming into the comic book world. And so, his star was just really incredibly taking off. And I was clueless. I was absolutely clueless. I was not on the internet at the time, so it wasn't even out or even picking up any comic book magazine. So I didn't know who was who. And then to have someone who was absolutely that incredible, living in the city, and frequenting my comic book store, my Geiling that had been going to Beguiling for years, and just strike up this conversation very innocently and just talk about openly and honestly saying, this is what I've grown tired of comics, and this book here is bringing me back. This is incredible. But it stuck with me. That conversation that we had just stuck with me. And then going home, actually reading the work and then just saying, looking at it and realizing, oh, he didn't just illustrate it, he wrote the book too. So that was also an eye-opener for me as well. So I had to do research. Who is this guy? And when that face came up, it was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm pretty certain that, as soon as I walked out that door, he was having a laugh. He was having a laugh at my expense. And you know what? Every right. They had every right in that shop to be laughing at everyone. But it definitely did inspire me in terms of his storytelling. His storytelling for me is second to none. It's absolutely incredible. Just the upbeat of the work, the message was very different than what was on the stands at the time. Oh, yeah. And then also to see someone who was, writing and illustrating at the same time sort of put a bug in me. I mean, it's been many, many years since that day, but it put a bug in me that said, maybe you can do it. You know, it's one thing being an artist and being an illustrator and reading scripts and interpreting scripts. It's another thing to be writing and then thinking as a writer, but thinking as an illustrator at the same time. My scripts are a mess. My scripts have doodles on the side as I'm writing, and it's a great mess. That helps me. I think visually. When I think of a story and I think of the action plays out in my head like a movie, and I'm just writing what I see, capturing the dialogue as it's going back and forth, and then I'll make notes. Something catches my eye, a particular scene that's in my head. I guess I need to jot this down because I'm not going to remember this in 5 minutes because so much is going on while the script is coming together. And so, that meeting Darwyn definitely, I would say, inspired my return to reading comics and wanting to be a comic book artist again. I mean, ever since I was 8, that's all I wanted to do was be a comic book artist, and to sort of walk away from that childhood dream and become responsible adult, was a difficult decision. But I'm glad I went the route that I did, because I'm at a place now where I'm incredibly comfortable balancing, my day job and my nighttime job. They mingle well. They mingle very, very well, which has been incredibly helpful. And I've had incredible support from my colleagues at work, and even from my students. My students, when they first knew that that I was interested in drawing comics and that I had plans, they pushed me, they drove me, and they would say, "Sir," they would say, "Bring in your work. We want to see it." And it's like that kind of motivation and confidence was incredibly, incredibly helpful in the beginning. And then their feedback helped. And you know what? It's sometimes it's tough getting feedback, that type of feedback from your students, because you get the positive and negative. And when I get the positive and the negative, especially when I get the negative, that's when I know that I did a good job teaching them, because now they've developed that eye.
Yeah.
They've developed that eye where they can not just edit their own work, but other people's work. So they've grown in maturity as artists. And for me, that gives me a great sense of pride.
Absolutely. And it certainly should. And this ties well into my next question, which is, you sort of touched on it before, and evidently as a teacher, you'll very actively be able to deal with this. Is how does legacy play a part in your comics, and I suppose also in your life?
I couldn't do what I do or how I do it if it weren't for the artists who came before me. I studied their work. I borrowed, I stole. It's what we artists do. We learn, we steal, we borrow, and then we push forward, and then we pass on to the next generation. What drove me into teaching was the fact that one of the studios I was working at the time, we were hiring a lot of co-op students, high school grade students, coming in to do their co-op placement. And it was sort of thrust upon me to be their mentors at the beginning of the process, so they can figure out how our environment worked, and then they'd go on and do their thing. And that interaction, working with young people, just sort of inspired me to go, oh, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. Because if anyone had asked me 6 months before we had taken on these high school students, I would have said, no way. There's no way you'd get me in a classroom. I remember what I was like in a classroom. I remember what my friends were like in classrooms. There's no way you'd get me in a classroom. But that interaction, that one-on-one, sparked something in me. And I goes, I think I could at least try it. Let me try it. And here I am nearly 20 years later. And I absolutely love it. Still enjoy it. but it's that giving back. If I didn't have art teachers, professors, people who I apprenticed under, I wouldn't be here. And so to be able to give that to the next generation is incredibly important for me. And to have students come back, I have students who are everything from photographers, animators, interior designers. And, when I hear back from them and they say, "Sir, that thing you said in class that day," and I go, what was it that I said? Well, it inspired me, sir. And well, I'm glad I said it. I don't remember what it was I said, but I'm glad I said it. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. I'm glad you went into a program or a career that you're incredibly passionate about and you're finding success doing it. And success, meaning that you get up every morning and you go to a job or career you absolutely love, and they do.
Fascinating and amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Like truly. To get a little less heavy, I guess.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier another issue. So one that's exciting to hear. Do you know how many more of the Gathering Place issues we're getting, or are you just gonna keep doing it until you feel it's run its course?
Right now, I have researched enough artists for 6 issues.
Ooh, wow.
So
okay.
yeah. So issue 4, I would say, is about 3/4 of the way finished. And thank you. And the theme around issue 4 are wartime artists.
Oh, okay.
So artists who were impacted by war in one way or another. So we have a really strong group of artists from Kazuo Nakamoto, who is a Japanese Canadian artist originally from Vancouver, who, as he started high school and was beginning his career in the arts, he and his family were forced into internment camps at the start of the Second World War.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, he spent 3 years in internment camp, and after the war had ended and he and his family were released from the camp, the province of British Columbia said, "You're free, but not free to live here in this province anymore." So they were forced out of the province. They moved to Ontario, first to Hamilton, and then eventually to Toronto. And I came to find out that when he came to Toronto, he attended my high school.
No way.
So I'm proud to say that I attended the same high school as this incredible artist. And what's also fascinating was that one of his high school design teachers in Vancouver, he would meet up with many years later in Toronto, because he was one of the founding members of the Artists 11, which was a group of Canadian abstract artists from across the country who worked primarily in the 50s and 60s, at least their heyday. And one of his fellow artists in the group was his old high school teacher from Vancouver, Jock McDonald. Well, when I saw this connection, I go, there's something greater here.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at this other artist's career, and it inspired the theme for the 5th issue, which will be Canadian artists who are also teachers.
Oh, okay.
So it's also coming full circle for me as an art teacher to be able to give back to art teachers and say, hey, we're all respected too. This is sharing the love there. But I'm still finalizing. I can really only fit 4 artists in there. I kind of want to squeeze in a 5th, so we'll see how that one goes. But for issue 4, the remaining artists are also Molly Lamb-Boback, who was the first and only wartime woman Canadian artist during the Second World War.
Wow.
And she had to fight for that designation too. Yeah, there were other women artists who were painting they weren't on the front lines. So unlike the men who were allowed to go on the front lines and paint these dynamic scenes, once the war was declared over, They were sent over to paint sort of the aftermath. And Molly Bobak came back with some incredibly dark pieces, which are very different than her typical work. Her typical work, very bright, very happy, great sense of community. I think that's one of the things I really like about her work, is how she loves to paint groups of people. And by strong contrast, her works of, the aftermath of, looking at France and England after the Second World War was just absolutely horrific. And then knowing that in all of this horror, there were people there at one point, and she would stray away from painting a lot of people in there just to leave that vastness and that emptiness. And but who else do I have? I have Jordi Bonet, who is a Spanish-born artist who during the time of the Spanish Civil War, he lost his arm. He lost his dominant arm.
Oh.
His father was a doctor who tried to save the arm, wasn't able to. Eventually, the family moved to Canada. They lived in Montreal for a while. He developed his art skills with his left. And again, incredible work. Incredible work. What made working on that story eerie for me was I had already selected him as an artist, and about a couple of weeks later, while in the process of writing his script, I broke my wrist. My dominant wrist. And for an artist, that's like an absolute horror, because it's like, will I be able to go back to doing what I was doing before? And then also realizing, I'm going to be out of commission for 6 weeks. What's going to happen? So I continued writing. But in my stubbornness, I told myself, what if I were to draw this story with my left hand?
Yeah.
And I did. I did my best. It was a challenge. And it hurt. Mentally it hurt. I could feel those, pathways building in my brain. But it definitely was an experience. And then reading up on other artists who have suffered trauma or injury that were unable to work with their dominant arm, I found inspiring as well. I remember during that time I read a story about Frank Frazeda, who, after suffering a stroke, was unable to draw again with his dominant arm and had to rely on his other arm. And when you look at his sketches and his drawings, there's such an energy in that work that you can still see Frazeda's, hand in there, but there's such a stronger energy. And I think it was just that stubbornness that you just can't stop certain individuals from working. Yeah. And so someone like a Frazeda or like Jordi Bonet, you couldn't stop this kid's passion for art, and he grew up to be this incredible artist who created large works, a lot of three-dimensional murals with clay or ceramics, and he went big, he went huge. So there are these huge murals throughout Canada, mostly in Quebec or Quebec City. There's a museum there, but not a museum, university, where one of the buildings, there's an outdoor ceramic mural that he created. And it's cool. Again, stubbornness is a good thing, or persistence, however you want to call it.
That's such a nicer word, but it really is the same thing.
It really is. Yeah. And the last artist for issue 4 is Frederick Varley. So he's probably the most famous name, I would say, in the group of 4, in that he was a member of the group of 7. But I have a really soft spot for Frederick Varley, in that as much as he was famed for his landscapes with the group of 7, he loved to paint portraits, and he was an incredible portrait painter who never really gets the dues he deserves for being such an incredible portrait painter. And he's someone who I look at when I look at portraits and my own work that I do for portrait painting. I will look at his work as inspiration every now and then, just for something different. Again, I tend to lean on this realism side, but I like to challenge myself and bring in new color palettes, new ideas for composition, and sometimes it's good to look at someone a little bit different than what you're accustomed to working in.
Oh, absolutely. That is fascinating. So the way that you've been inspired with who you want to write about and the artists you choose to put in issue 4, 5, and it sounds like 6, maybe 7. I like that you're just letting yourself get interested and sort of follow the path of this guy was connected to this guy. What happened with these people? You're definitely going to go through and be able to dig up some amazing artists that otherwise might never have had anyone really take an interest, or really be celebrated in a small way. You're immortalizing them, which is incredible.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day, yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns, can't find issue 2? Yeah, collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries, you need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it, true believer, not lying, always up for an awesome summer crossover time.